The calendar read March 14th, 2016, London. Inside a converted warehouse in Bermondsey, a music fair was in full swing. 10,000-pound vintage guitars were changing hands behind locked glass, but nobody was looking at the 300-pound handmade classical guitars tucked into the darkest corner of the building. That's exactly why 74-year-old Albert had decided to pack up and go home that afternoon. He'd look at the care home brochure on his table, count the money for Ruth's medication one more time, and face the number that never added up. But he couldn't do that, because just before 2:30, Mick Jagger walked into the dark corner, picked up one of those guitars, and a sound that Warehouse had never heard before began to rise. The thing is, that day had started like any other. Mick Jagger opened his eyes in a Southwark hotel room just after 6. He had a rehearsal that evening at a studio in Bermondsey. 11 hours to fill. Every city, same ritual. Out early. Walk. Look. He never knew what he was searching for, but he always knew it when he saw it. He pulled on his deep purple chiffon shirt, clasped the silver bracelets, turned the skull ring on his finger, and headed out. March air hit cool on the Bermondsey streets. Mick walked. 3 blocks later, he spotted a banner across the front of an old warehouse. London Instrument and Craft Exhibition. He wouldn't normally go in. Crowds, phones, people pointing cameras, but a craft fair meant things built by hand. He slipped through the door. First thing he saw inside, glass cases. Young men in fitted jackets behind locked cabinets full of pre-war Martins and 50s Les Pauls, price tags with more digits than most people's monthly rent. Not a single guitar you could touch. Mick slowed in front of one, a 1959 Gretsch Country Gentleman. Its buckle rash priced into the tag. Beautiful instrument. But behind that glass it was a museum piece. He moved on. In one corner, digital interface systems had turned into a wall of touch screens. Somewhere else, teenagers on laptops were building beats with headphones on. Everything had a price tag. Everything was locked behind glass. And not a soul in the place was asking the one question that mattered. Who made this? Past the middle of the warehouse, the stands got smaller. Crowds thinned. Suits disappeared. But the real change was the smell. Sawdust, old wood, varnish from another era. Mick stopped. He knew that smell. He followed his nose to the back wall where a few tables were crammed between the last column and the concrete. A woman selling sheet music. A man with a box of old harmonicas, and in the corner, pressed against the wall, one table. The organizers had put them here. Cheap rent. 0-foot traffic. Sitting here meant accepting the world had stopped seeing you. Mick was approaching when he heard the voice. Young. Sharp. Confident. Albert, I'm serious. Nobody buys handmade classical guitars anymore. Let me sort you out. There's a residential place in Herne Hill. Good people. Warm rooms. Better than sitting here waiting for nobody. Mick looked from behind a stand. A man in his late 30s, Danny, stood at the corner table. Here's an important detail. Danny hadn't always been across from that table. He'd once sat beside it. Albert had taught him to hold his first plane, read the grain, feel where spruce met maple. That was before Danny realized factory guitars sold faster. Now his stand was the brightest in the fair. Danny Marsh Instruments and Repairs. And the strangest thing, a care home brochure sat on Albert's table. Danny had left it there the week before. The old man behind the table, 74, jacket worn at the elbows, shoulders down but back straight, didn't speak for a long time. He'd been there since 5:30, carried 12 cases alone, and his knees knew it. All that work for nothing. Not one person had stopped. His hands rested on the table edge. Gnarled knuckles, calloused joints, the honest dust of 50 years worn into his fingertips. A half-used bottle of wood glue and a roll of 400 grit sandpaper sat at the corner. Yesterday's work. Then he looked up. Son, he said, low, steady. These trees waited longer to dry than you've been alive. Danny laughed. Short, hollow. Sure thing, Albert. He turned, then stopped. Even your own daughter said the same thing. I'm not telling you anything new. He walked back to his bright stand. Albert's shoulders dropped. He stared at the care home brochure but couldn't read the letters. But that wasn't the only problem. Under the table, a small bag from Boots rustled. Ruth's medication. The box insurance wouldn't cover. One more small detail. He opened his wallet, looked at the photo behind the notes. Ruth, young, smiling, wind in her hair. Closed it. His phone lit up. Unread message from his daughter. Dad, please be realistic. He killed the screen and started closing cases. Packing up. Mick saw all of it. From another decade, a sound drifted in. A session violinist on a cramped stage in Richmond in 1963, the first string sound Mick had heard played live. He recognized that posture, same one. He walked over. 12 classical guitars on a dark cloth, each one a different wood, hand-carved rosettes around the sound holes. A thermos of cold tea at the edge, half-finished crossword, and in the corner of the table a black violin case. Old, worn, spotless. Albert looked up, studied the stranger. He had no idea who he was. You want to look? Look, he said, tired. But I'm packing up. Don't waste my time. Mick didn't answer. He picked up a guitar, turned it over, studied the maple grain on the back, ran his fingers along the spruce maple seam. No glue squeeze out. Pure dovetail. Then he pressed his ear to the body and tapped. Listened to what the wood held inside. This tone wood wasn't trapping sound. It was letting it breathe. How long did this top season? He said. Albert's eyes changed. He recognized the kind of man who could ask that. 15 years, he said. Alpine spruce. Balkan maple back. Bone saddle, not factory plastic. The edge left his voice. 50 years of craftsmanship stepped into its place. Mick nodded. His eyes moved to the violin case. He reached. Albert's hand came fast, pushed it away. Don't touch that. Sharp as a blade. Silence dropped like ice. Two men looking at each other. That belongs to my Ruth, Albert said, a tone lower. Only she plays it. Mick stepped back. Didn't ask. Didn't push. I understand, he said. He turned to the guitar, set it on his knee, left hand on the neck, right on the strings. The world knew what happened when Mick Jagger touched a stringed instrument. Albert didn't. He just saw a tired stranger holding his guitar. Mick closed his eyes. His left foot started searching for rhythm, and then he played something nobody expected. The opening phrase of Little Red Rooster, not the Rolling Stones version. The pure acoustic blues it had always been, before any amplifier touched it, before any stage got beneath it. Delta blues stripped down to gut and fingernail and 50 years of the same lesson learned over and over in different rooms. The first chord cut through the warehouse dark like a crack of morning light. Nylon strings and spruce top, no amp. The raw, crying soul of a thing played by someone who knew exactly what it was. Albert stopped breathing. That guitar, built with his own hands, had never spoken like this. He knew its limits. Which chord would strain? Which fret would choke? This man was playing past all of it. That sound shouldn't have come from that guitar. But it did. Albert's chin trembled. He held steady, then his hand moved to the violin case. He'd made his choice. He opened it, took out Ruth's violin. She hadn't played since the arthritis took hold of her bow hand 3 years ago. Only her fingers had touched this instrument for 41 years. He placed it under his chin. Reached for the bow. Paused. Ruth had been the last one to hold it. Then he held it and played. Guitar and violin rose together. Two old men in the darkest corner of a warehouse playing at a table nobody had noticed. The sound hit concrete, climbed steel beams, bounced off the ceiling, and came back down richer than it went up. The warehouse had turned into a resonance chamber. Concrete and steel wouldn't let the sound escape. Just kept folding it back on itself, wrapping it, building it. The bright aisles at the front went quiet as the dark corner found its voice. Mick carried the melody. Albert built the floor. Low notes, careful, 50 years guiding the bow. But his hands shook. That bow had last been in Ruth's fingers. He'd broken his own rule. Why he'd broken it, he didn't know. Or maybe he did, but couldn't name it yet. That breaking could be heard in every note. The guitar was warm, full. The violin was thin, fragile, but certain. just like the man playing it. Suddenly, a woman at the front pulled off her earphones. Where's that coming from? People left the glass cases and followed the sound to the dark corner. Eyes turned, no stage. Just an old table, guitars, and two old men. A young man near the back squinted at the guitarist's right hand. The silver ring. He searched his phone, found it, looked at the face, went pale. The whispers spread. Phones rose. The sheet music woman leaned toward Albert. "Do you know who that is?" She whispered. Albert didn't look away from Mick. "Who?" She leaned closer. "Mick Jagger," Albert froze. The bow hung above the strings. He looked at the man, the one he'd told, "Don't waste my time," the one whose hand he'd pushed from the violin case. That was Mick Jagger playing his guitar. Albert swallowed. Everything stopped for 1 second. Then he put the bow back and kept playing, because once Ruth's violin started talking, silencing it wasn't something he could do. Mick pushed the melody to its peak, eyes closed, the half-smile at the corner of his mouth. The sound of 50 years of practice in a room smaller than most people's sitting rooms was beside him now. 40 people and growing. Danny lifted his head from his stand. His eyes drifted to his own factory guitar. He wiped the surface with his palm, the same palm that had once held its first plane in Albert's workshop. Last note. Fingers on strings. Bow in the air. Guitar and violin went quiet together. The sound hit the beams and faded. The crowd exhaled, then applause. The most invisible corner had become the loudest. Mick opened his eyes, looked at Albert first. Not the crowd. Albert held Ruth's violin to his chest, chin trembling. Standing tall. Eyes bright but dry. Old-timers don't cry, but sometimes standing tall weighs more than tears. Mick set the guitar down, pulled out his pen. "Albert, I want to sign these." All of them. Albert looked at the pen, then at Mick, jaw set. "Mr. Jagger, every one of these guitars has months of work in it. These hands have done this for 50 years. Put that away. I don't take charity. Never have. Never will." Mick put the pen back, looked into Albert's eyes. Unwavering dignity. Hard as walnut, light as spruce. Then he looked at the crowd. These people hadn't come to the dark corner because of a pen. They'd come because of what they'd heard. He thought for a moment, then pulled out the pen again, picked up the first guitar, signed the back of the headstock. Small, neat. The signature of a man who had signed things in larger spaces. Set it down. Second. Third. By the time Albert understood, the fourth was done. A Mick Jagger signed handmade classical guitar, whisper to shout. First buyer, a man in his 60s. 300 pounds on the table. "My wife always wanted to learn," he said. A young woman next, card and crumpled notes. "My grandfather played classical guitar," she told Albert. He nodded, tried to speak. Couldn't. After it all, 11 guitars gone in under an hour. Albert was holding more than several months of Ruth's medication. And it wasn't just his table. The harmonica man got questions. The sheet music woman sold her whole box. The dark corner was visible for the first time. Albert picked up the care home brochure, folded it, put it in the bin under the table. Danny hadn't moved. He looked at Albert's nearly empty cloth, then at his own full stand. Said nothing. But something in his face had changed. Mick checked the time. Past 3. Less than 4 hours. He should leave. But he sat down. Albert offered the thermos. Cold tea. How did she start playing? Mick asked. Ruth. Took it up at 38. Said it was the one thing she'd always wanted to do and kept putting off. Albert looked at the violin case. She never got good, but she got better every year. We used to play together on Sunday mornings. I'd play guitar. She'd play that. He paused. She can't anymore. Her hand, Mick nodded. My first proper rehearsal space was a room above a pub in Soho. The landlord's wife played violin on Friday nights in the bar downstairs. I'd stop in just to listen on the way up. He looked at the violin case. When I heard it today, I heard that room. Albert was quiet. When someone who learned from you turns their back, he said, it cuts deeper than wood splitting. But wood you can throw away. A person you can't. Mick said nothing. placed his hand on Albert's shoulder. Two old men, dark corner, nearly empty table. He stood up, fixed his shirt, held out his hand. Albert took it. "Craftsman's grip, rehearsal at 7, Mick said, half a smile. "But I'd like to commission one. A guitar, your choice of wood. I'll have someone call you this week." He turned and was gone. Albert pulled out his phone. Called his daughter. "Couldn't speak at first?" "It's me," he said, voice shaking but smiling. "Stop by on your way home. I need to tell you something." He hung up, picked up the thermos, folded the crossword, slid the violin case over his shoulder. The sheet music woman called out as he passed. "Good afternoon, Albert." He nodded. It was days kept coming. A year later, a small workshop opened off Lewisham High Street. Webb Handmade guitars. Plain wood sign, sawdust on the bench, spruce drying in the corner. A framed fair badge on the wall. Bermondsey Instrument and Craft Exhibition, March 14, 2016. Albert still woke at 5 every morning. Some things don't change. He'd unlock the workshop at 6, start the kettle, and pick up where he'd left off. The smell of wood and glue filled the room before the light came through the window. Ruth sat by the workshop window, the violin in her lap. The medication had worked. The inflammation in her bow hand had eased enough, the specialist said, for gentle playing. Sunday mornings she played. Albert built. The workshop filled with the same piece as that afternoon in Bermondsey. In the center of the window, one guitar on a stand, different from the rest. 15-year alpine spruce, hand-picked Balkan maple, the finest rosette Albert had ever carved. A small card beneath it, made for a friend. Not for sale. One Thursday, Danny walked past. He slowed at the window, looked at the guitar, read the card, stopped, peered inside. Albert at his bench, reading the wood with his fingers. Danny said nothing. Touched the glass once. Walked on, Albert didn't see. But Ruth saw from the window and smiled. Nobody ever bought that guitar. Some things aren't made to be sold. Sometimes an instrument's deepest sound is heard without ever being played. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications and look at the other stories on our channel.